7 years, I used to create meat packaging commercials and meat ads for the biggest food companies in Finland. I consulted them how to make you and me, consumers like us, buy more of their products. And then I went vegan. I co-founded an animal rights organization and I wrote a non-fiction book about the biggest lies the meat industry tells us. That's a big 180-degree turn, so how exactly did that happen? I'm going to be honest, my parents would have probably never guessed that I would stop eating meat and eggs and dairy, because my childhood was quite normal and typical like many others. I used to spend my summers in the countryside with lots of animals, chicken, a neighborhood cow who we took milk from, and lots of other animals I really cared for. And of course, the most our beloved pet dog, Teddy. But at the same time, I also ate a lot of animals. I ate them in a shape form of sausage, meatballs, a burger, and anything I really could have. So at the same time, I loved the animals and I also loved eating meat. And in my mind, there wasn't any conflict about that subject. And I continued to university and got a job at my dream company. I could help big companies sell products and understand what consumers wanted and most importantly wanted to hear. And I didn't really question whether the stories and the promises we made were true. I continued and founded my own company, helping restaurants, took pictures of meat, burgers, and made them look as tasty as possible. But then one day, I was 26 years old, and I was eating my favorite pizza, pepperoni and mozzarella. And my girlfriend sent me a message. You have to take a look at this article. And I did. There was a veterinarian from Sweden who worked at a pig slaughterhouse. And she told in the article that what she saw was horrible. The conditions of pigs arriving at the slaughterhouse was something she never wanted to see. There were infections, the pigs couldn't properly walk, and no matter what she did, she couldn't help the animals. And after 80 days, she quit the job and wrote a book about it. And now I was there reading about the information that she wanted to tell. And that was the first time I realized that there's a long road to my plate for the animals. And they're really the meat packages that just don't appear in the show or as a pizza. And it demands an animal. And now I learned what kind of a life the animals have to live. And in my mind, the animals like pigs and dogs and cows and chicken, I valued them all the same. But even though I valued them the same, I didn't act like that. Our dogs, our cats, I loved and took care for and really remembered. Even though they died, they were in my memories and in my heart. But the pigs and the cows and the chicken, I just consumed. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and I was done. I didn't have to think about that. And that changed that I wanted to stop eating meat. First it was meat, and then 2-3 months later I learned more about the Finnish egg industry, about the Finnish milk industry, and I stopped drinking milk and eating eggs too. And what I quickly learned as I became vegan is that vegans have a big problem, and that's a PR problem. Because even though many people don't really understand what veganism is or what vegans do, I think everyone has a strong opinion. Or at least that's what I've learned. Because what vegans do is they criticize something with lots of money poured into animal farming. We have images of happy chickens giving thumbs up while we eat the wings, or free cows in the commercials, or stress-free pigs. And the promises we are made that it's family-owned business. Positive words like free range. And the commercials and the promises are repeated until we all believe them. And from the day that we understand language, we are taught about stories like Old MacDonald had a happy farm with joyous animals. So there's no reason for us to question it. We just learn to accept that that's the truth. But unfortunately, what I've learned that it's usually just a fairy tale. This is the most common bird in Finland. It's a broiler chicken, and they never see the sunlight in their life. It's a short lifespan, 5 weeks, and then they get gassed at slaughterhouses. They live in halls closed from the public and without any windows. And there are tens of thousands of them in the same hall. This is highly optimized business, highly optimized production, so optimized in fact, but not for the health of the animals and not for the welfare of the animals, but to get as much meat as possible. Chicken is bred from red jungle fowl, a bird that still lives in Asia, but it's bred to produce now on farms as much meat as possible, and they grow so quickly in those 5 weeks that they can't properly walk. They have problems in their hearts. And out of 82 million birds, broiler birds in Finland raised each year, 2.5 million die before they reach a slaughterhouse. And another 2.5 million are discarded at the slaughterhouses because the conditions that they arrive in are so horrible. But we as consumers and as human beings want to do good, and that's understandable. I think every one of us wants to do as good as possible. That's why, for example, when we purchase eggs, we choose perhaps free-range eggs, because we realize that free sounds good. It must be good for the animals. Now, this is a free-range farm. It's a typical farm in Finland, and the picture is from Finland. It features from 3,000 to 6,000 birds. If it's under 3,000, it could be organic. But whether it's free, I think it's up to your interpretation. The chickens would typically live in a small group of around 10 to 12 other chickens. And the stress is enormous. But I think the stress is not even the worst part here. The overbreeding is done in the egg factories too. As I mentioned, the chicken that lives, the bird still living in Asia, that it is the so-called ancestor of the modern chicken, lays about 12 to 15 eggs per year just to populate, just to get the chicks and live on. But that is not enough for the factory farming. Today, chickens produce up to an egg per day. That means 350. And once again, overbreeding creates health problems, broken bones, and we no longer even eat the egg-laying chickens. They are used as fertilizers or food for fur farms, because there's not much else to get from there other than eggs. The condition is that bad. Unfortunately, as we go on, the same thing, the promises we are made by commercial that here in Finland you don't have to worry. The pigs are stress-free. But that's the condition the pigs live at. They live in a small enclosure with tens of pigs together, and the bigger they get, the less space they have, and the more stress they get. And they bite each other's tails. Every other pig in Finland has a tail bites or even tails broken by studies in Finland. And as I interviewed workers working in the pig factories, I learned that the workers suffer too. The air quality at pig farms is so bad that even though you end working there, you will continue coughing. And pigs have the same issues. That's why every third pig has lung infections here in Finland. And the cows. I think out of all the animals we mentioned, the cows are our favorites. That's why on dairy milk packages we see free cow. But what free means is free of being tied by their necks. They are no longer tied 9 months a year, but are free to roam inside the farm. That doesn't mean that they get to go outside, but free from being tied to. Another marketing trick I would propose. But here, as I usually tell people around animal conditions on my weekly TikTok lives, people have lots of questions. I'm sure you do too. And that's good. We all should be asking questions. Often a question or maybe an argument is said that, okay, this might be bad or not as good as I hoped, but wolves eat meat too. So why can't I eat whatever I like? I think it's a bit unfair to wolves because the wolves don't have universities, philosophical degrees, don't understand what's right or wrong, or can have or listen to TED Talks. Now, if a human being did something wrong, perhaps illegal, we would call the police and make up a court case. But if a wolf did something wrong in the forest, maybe to another wolf or another animal, I think we won't be seeing them in court. So we really do have different rules for us humans and the wolves, even when consuming food. But when it comes to legality, it is true that it's currently legal to eat meat, certain meat, maybe different in other countries, but it is legal. But is legal also okay? Is legal moral? And I think we have to look just 150 years back in the history to remember that it was legal to own another human being. If you wanted then to criticize that, you would hear that, well, what I'm doing is legal. Would that be okay? If we go back just a few tens years, women couldn't vote. And we see still currently legal issues that minorities are oppressed. And it's legal in one way or another. But we've still criticized and want to do better. And I think once again we have to ask the question, just because doing something is legal, does it make it right? Now that we have talked about animals or legalities, it's important to understand, does my choice really matter? I'm just one human being in the whole of many, many other humans, billions of them. So let's talk about food choices and environmental issues. A third of our emissions on this planet come from food agriculture. And the choice we usually make revolve around maybe choosing meat, local, family-owned Finnish farm, ground beef, or my favorite, tofu, and where the soybeans come from Australia. Even though it feels like just a small beep at the cash registry, it actually has a huge impact. Here are the stats of emissions per kilogram produced protein. The highest of them all is, even though it's Finnish, it's the beef. For 1 kilogram of beef, 26 kilos of methane and other carbon emissions are created. Then comes the pork, and then the broiler, and only then more environmentally friendly options. Proteins like oats or fava beans, they could be Finnish too, or tofu, for example, from Austria. Now, this is an enormous enormous difference. So how much tofu would we need to buy for the tofu to fill the emissions that 1 kilo of just beef creates? That would be 55 kilos. And they will be still the same emissions. I love tofu, and I'll tell you that this is a lot of tofu. And the comparison is 1 kilogram of beef. This might seem counterintuitive, because we hear all the time told that you should always support local because it doesn't create as much emissions. But as we currently learn, that's not true. We are often told that transportation is usually what causes the most of the issues. And we maybe even hear that they are taken by planes, all the tofus and avocados and bananas and everything we've heard about. But if you would go to a shop and try to find a product that is actually imported to Finland by plane, I think you would have to spend around a week to find one. Because according to the data, only 0.60% of the food products sold in Finland are actually flown in here. Most travel by water or by roads or by rails. Now, if the transportation emissions are actually so low that if we take the kilo of beef and the kilo of tofu and think how many times would we have to transport the tofu to Finland and back to Austria again for the transportation emissions to get so big that they would be similar to beef. And you would have to transport tofu 320 times back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's how little the emissions of transportation matter nowadays. But that's not all, because we currently are doing our food agriculture quite in a way that we feed the plants to animals, and then we eat the animals. And the animals eat much more, because there's always more of the animals in factory farms than human beings. And we need a lot of agricultural land for it. So if we chose plant-based agriculture, we would need 75% less land. And that's done by the largest study ever done to this date. It featured 54,000 different farms and transportation emissions. And that's a huge difference. And each time you make a choice between plant-based or meat-based or dairy-based, there's also a huge difference each time. Plant-based emissions are up to 56% lower than meat or dairy-based. So each time you make a choice, you have the possibility to cut the emissions you create and even save animal lives. Because even though we can't really imagine how much our choices matter, they really do, trust me. On average, a person in Finland, their diet demands 82 animals per year. 82 animals. But all my presentation could be thrown in a trash bin if eating plant-based wasn't healthy, if it was bad for us. But luckily, nowadays, we know that it's good. The more plants we eat and the less meat we eat is better for our health. That's what we learned from the Nordic nutritional guidelines, and then last year at the end from the Finnish nutritional guidelines. But our thoughts about the necessity of meat or milk, they don't just reappear out of nowhere. This is a poster from my school when I was a little bit shorter, and it features the biggest dairy company's commercial in school for children to see that if you do not drink milk, your bones will just fall off and you'll be broken. And if you do drink our milk, you'll be good, you'll be fast. And the same comes to our identity. Now, I've heard many times that in order to be a real man, you have to eat real meat. And trust me, this is one of the best and most successful commercials ever created. And it started a long time ago for us for the advertisement to be repeated for years and years. So when it came to my choice around 6 years ago, eating that pizza, pepperoni and mozzarella pizza, I really couldn't figure out any other reason for eating meat and dairy than it just tasted good. But I think we all have a huge impact in our daily lives, to our close people, to friends, to neighbor, and to animals and the environment. We all create it could be either neutral, maybe sometimes negative, and sometimes good. But what's most important for all is that each day we can choose to do better. Thank you very much.